What's the deal for a ceasefire in Ukraine? 2 months into the Trump presidency, things are still largely unchanged on the front lines. Many say they want the war to end, but the crucial question remains, under what conditions? After more than 3 years of war, the US president has made peace negotiations a top priority. He seeks a quick deal with the aggressor, Vladimir Putin. But a highly anticipated phone call between the two achieved little so far. 30 days without attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, yet Russia continues its assaults. Ukraine and its European partners fear a one-sided agreement at the expense of the embattled nation. On To The Point, we ask Trump's plan or a wish list for Putin? Who decides the future of Ukraine? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's good to have you with us. Let's meet today's guests. Nico Lange is a political consultant and security expert and a senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference. He will join us for the first part of the show. And Anna Sauer is a journalist and international editor at Germany's weekly Die Zeit. So to both of you, thank you for being here. And for those of you who know this show, you will have noticed that we are not in our usual setting. We had to switch studios due to technical issues. So we do apologize if things are a little bit different than what you're used to on this show. Let's start with taking a closer look at those high-level phone calls that we saw this week. Anna, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of those two heavily promoted conversations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin first, then Volodymyr Zelensky? If you read the White House papers and press releases, it sounds like peace in Ukraine is just around the corner.
Well, it is not. It is certain that the two readouts, both from the Kremlin and the White House, do create the illusion that there is a ceasefire or that there might be a ceasefire soon. But we see on the ground that this is just not happening. Russia has attacked Ukraine in the past days, even after the two calls. So I think it's just a continuation of the fiction that Donald Trump is creating, that he's able to come to a quick ceasefire with Putin for the price of throwing Ukraine under the bus, frankly.
Now, Nico, before this conversations took place, we heard that the ball was on Russia's court. Of course, the goal was not a partial ceasefire on energy, but an actual total ceasefire. Why do you think Putin is so reluctant to give in to these demands or plans from Donald Trump?
Putin wants to destroy Ukraine, and he wants to change the European order in general, and he feels no pressure to depart from his maximum plans. And so far, Trump has only been charming him, and he has been putting pressure on Ukraine. So why should Putin stop? There is no incentive for him to stop. He could stop any time. The war would be over any minute if Putin gives the order, but Trump is not pressuring him.
Wouldn't there be incentives, for example, from the economy, from that perspective, or from re-entering the international stage that could be, made available through Donald Trump's power?
Theoretically, Trump could have instruments to pressure Putin. I think he has the right intuition when he thinks about energy prices. But will the energy price go down at the speed that really puts Putin under pressure? I doubt it. And is Trump sanctioning the shadow fleet that Putin is using to sell his oil? At the moment, not really. And apart from that, is the economic pressure enough? I mean, I know that Trump always thinks about financial and economic coercion, but I'm convinced you need military pressure for Putin, and that's only done through military support for Ukraine. And Trump is very reluctant when it comes to this.
Trump does talk about his relationship with Putin as something that is an asset. There are negotiators on both sides working to secure a potential ceasefire, but the ultimate decision of war or peace in Ukraine rests at the top level. That's why Tuesday's phone call between Trump and Putin was highly anticipated.
A dynamic duo. Trump makes no secret of his admiration for the Russian president. They share the same critical stance towards Ukraine and NATO. Even before his presidency, Donald Trump had long-standing business contacts with Russia, which raises doubts as to where Trump's true loyalties lie. Trump seems determined to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible in order to get back into business with Russia. Many Ukrainians are fretting to know how many concessions will he make to Putin. In any case, the Russian president is in no hurry to start the 30-day ceasefire Trump has proposed. His army is advancing on all fronts. Instead, the Kremlin presented a series of additional demands that make implementing a quick ceasefire difficult. The two most important ones from the Russian perspective: territorial cessions and Ukraine's renouncement of membership to NATO. What are the odds of a ceasefire coming into effect in Ukraine under these conditions?
Now, Nico, you already mentioned that Putin has, from your perspective, no interest in a ceasefire or, for that matter, in ending the war. Is he then asking for these concessions or these demands, asking for the impossible on purpose?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's classic Soviet diplomacy. Many people have forgotten about Soviet diplomacy, but Soviet diplomacy is you demand something that is absolutely lunatic, and then you put the blame on the other side. So Putin will demand crazy things, and then he will say, look, I wanted peace, they are not fulfilling the demands, it's their fault. And unfortunately, to be honest, in the public discussion, in the media discussion, in the social media discussion, there are many people who are buying Putin's lies and are saying, look, it's NATO's fault now, or it's the Europeans' fault, or it's Ukraine's fault now that the war is continuing.
And now you are in the media landscape in Germany, a very prominent weekly, as we know. Do you agree with that assessment, that there are discourses that are essentially putting the blame on NATO or the West?
I think this discourse still exists. I think that for Germany, speaking for Germany, it has been improved through the past 3 years. I think this was a discourse that was very prominent in the beginning, but thanks to experts like Nico Lange or other Russia experts or experts on Eastern Europe, these discourses have, for some part, been debunked. But of course now, as Putin is starting to play his game, as described by Nico Lange, I'm afraid they might return, because it's hard to read what between the lines of what he's really saying and what he's intending to do. And I think too many people still want to take him literally, including Donald Trump, who wants to take Putin literally because it aids his own goals to come to a very quick ceasefire. So I think there's a lot of confusion of interpretation, but I think Nico Lange is right, that this is playing with the public, playing with politics, playing with the Americans, and for the sake of continuing the war effort, which he has not changed that goal at all, Putin.
Let's go through those demands and through what happened in those phone calls. The immediate, let's say, plausible result is that a 30-day ceasefire on energy infrastructure. What do you make of that, Nico?
It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. I mean, Putin needs 40 to 45 days to produce the missiles and cruise missiles and aeroballistic missiles for one wave of attacks. So he can give 30 days for free. It's even helping him because the Ukrainians have developed drones that are attacking energy infrastructures in Russia. So if he can get a break for 30 days, it costs nothing. It sounds good for Trump. It looks like it's an achievement. And it's this typical approach of negotiating that we have to take very seriously. It's like saying, yes, I want peace. There's a little nuance. And the little nuance is Ukraine does have to give up, and we need to change the European order, and the American troops have to go away. And then maybe we will get closer to peace. So if we fall into that trap, we will have these discussions forever without achieving anything. Putin needs to be put under pressure. There is no way around that.
All right. Thank you so much for your participation, Nico. It was a short one because of the technical issues we described. So we will hope to see you in a further show, and we will continue, Anna and I, discussing about these very important issues that we are having on the table today. Now, we just heard lunatic demands, that at least that's what Nico was telling us. And from your perspective, one of those demands would be to have a ceasefire, but without military and intelligence support from the West for Ukraine. What do you make of that? What would that mean for Ukraine?
Well, if you want to have a ceasefire, you have to set the conditions. You have to set a starting point, you have to set an end point, you have to make a list of targets that won't be targeted, and of course you have to have somebody who's surveilling the ceasefire. So taking all of this off the table is devaluating the whole idea of having a ceasefire. And I think as to the demands, Putin has already, before the conversation with Trump on the telephone, has never stepped back from his demand to own all the territories that Russia has annexed, which they haven't even occupied fully. So Ukraine would have to give Russia unoccupied territory to fulfill these demands. He has now, after the phone call, also demanded that Ukraine demilitarize, which would leave them pretty much naked to any further attack if they demilitarized. And he has asked them to not mobilize any more soldiers. And he has asked to stop US and European aid to Ukraine. So these, you can call those lunatic, but I think they really just have the purpose of making it impossible for Ukraine to chime in, to sign this ceasefire deal, and to be the party to be blamed in this game.
And you mentioned that Donald Trump seems to be buying into that narrative. Why do you think that is then? Why do you think we see this very optimistic tone from the White House and the perspective of negotiations that are supposed to take place in the Middle East?
Yeah, I personally still find it hard to get to drill down to the motives of Donald Trump, really. So I'm personally working with a model right now where several interests always overlap. So we have his personality, which is narcissist, which is vain. He wants to be somebody who is a big player on the big stage of the world. He wants to go down in the history books. So that's certainly one motive. And then, of course, there's the economic interests. And the readout from the White House mentions those explicitly. So he says that if Russia and the United States come together and create peace in Ukraine, there could be great business opportunities for both states. So it's about dividing up Ukraine and profiting from it for two major powers in the world. And the third, I think, is like an imperialist worldview where Donald Trump sees himself rather at the likes with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin than with the West, with his European allies. And I think all of these overlap. And I think Putin, and that's my concern, is very good in leveraging and these different motives, speaking to Donald Trump as a businessman, which you can also see in the readout from the Kremlin, where he lauds him as a businessman, where he lauds the business interests, the common business interests, and of course the flattery that is in it, that Donald Trump is might be like a big player and go down in the history books as he likes.
Yeah, that certainly is something that we have seen before as well. It's very telling that you just mentioned the European leaders for the first time, and we're in, what, minute 12 of the show. That's a very dire position. What does it mean for Europe to have European leaders watching all of this from the sidelines?
It's very depressing because Europe has really stepped up to support Ukraine in this war effort. It is, besides the United States, if you take all the European Union states together, they are the largest payer to this war. And particularly countries like my country, like Germany, they have gone out of their ways and completely switched policy positions to support Ukraine. So this is a bitter moment. But I think Europe is not powerless, because for some of the things that Donald Trump is promising Vladimir Putin, like easements on the sanctions, he would need Europe to come in, because Europe is very much sanctioning Russia, and it's very much felt in Russia, even though it could be felt more. But he would need Europe to release to ease those sanctions in order to fulfill this promise. And also Europe is still supporting Ukraine, and it will continue to support Ukraine. And of course, it will not be the same without the American money, without the American weapons, if Trump came to decide again, as he has done for a brief period of time, to stop US aid to Ukraine. But of course, Europe could decide to continue its aid and to help Ukraine fighting. So I think at some point he will come to the Europeans and has to ask them for things, and then Europe can say, well, we want to be at the table if you're demanding things from us. Especially
if it's supposed to halt aid and intelligence aid for Ukraine. There's another figure we haven't really talked about, which is Vladimir Zelensky, another important protagonist that is watching this apparently from the sidelines. He seems to be at the mercy of whatever Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin now decide. What do you make of his role and of his leadership at this moment?
It's a very difficult moment for Volodymyr Zelensky, too. So I think they were, even though they probably had the same worst-case scenarios playing out in Kiev, like in other European capitals, my feeling was that they were somewhat taken by surprise by the very, very worst case that then played out over the Munich Security Conference with the US defense minister coming to Europe and pretty much telling them, we are doing this without you, both you, Ukraine, and both you, Europe. And I think their first step was to stand up to it. To stand up to the bully, being Donald Trump, to try to close lines with the European allies. At the Munich Security Conference, Vladimir Zelensky addressed his European allies and said, we are now alone in this. We have to stand up both to the United States and Russia. And I think then Donald Trump pretty much made clear that he will not accept that stance. And to be honest, Vladimir Zelensky and Ukraine had to bow to it. And they had to bow to the demands after Donald Trump decided to take away aid. And I guess Ukraine took it seriously enough to come to the table with Donald Trump and to make major concessions, saying we agree to an unconditioned ceasefire, which is something that so far Ukraine had always rejected, and for good causes always rejected.
In the meantime, of course, the situation in the front lines doesn't look good at all. The withdrawal or even interruption of American support is making the situation for the Ukrainian army increasingly precarious, even in the Russian region of Kursk, which was captured last August.
A confident Russian President Putin donned his camouflage suit for the first time and demanded on camera that the army drive the remaining Ukrainian invaders completely out of the Kursk region. Days later, there was even talk of capturing around 2,000 Ukrainian fighters. However, independent military experts deny this occurred. But in Ukraine, the latest reports are being met with resignation. I'm sorry that we lost the lives of our soldiers, and so many of them. I really want to hope that this maneuver, that occupying the Kursk region, has good reasons. Ukrainian military leadership justifies itself by claiming that the Kursk region occupation tied up Russian troops and thus relieved pressure on other sections of the front. However, any hopes that conquered territories could be used as a bargaining chip in future negotiations are increasingly being dashed by the uncoordinated and unprotected retreat of Ukrainian soldiers. Could the Russian recapture of Kursk be the beginning of the end for Ukraine?
That's, of course, the question that military aspects are also discussing at this point. Anna Sauer in this talk show turned interview from Germany's weekly Die Zeit. What cards does Ukraine still have on this war if we're seeing the situation on the front lines like this?
The situation on the front lines is dire, but I think one important card is that it's dire for the Russians too, because Vladimir Putin continues to lose a lot of lives. And of course, a Russian life doesn't count as much in Russia, and to Vladimir Putin as a Ukrainian life does count in Ukraine for the Ukrainians. But still, he would have, at some points, he would have to remobilize, which apparently he is trying to avoid up to this point. So that's one thing. And of course, Ukraine still has the support of the European countries, and it still has its a population that is willing to continue fighting. And of course, as we have seen in the big film, there is some reluctance, and Ukrainians do question some of the military decisions taken by the Ukrainian government, for example, the Kursk excursion. But I think overall, and we see that in the polls, the support of the Ukrainian population to continue the war is also great. Our correspondent has just traveled to the front lines, spoken to many soldiers, which was after Donald Trump had stopped aid to Ukraine. And they said, well, this is really bad for us, but we still have to continue fighting because otherwise we will lose our country. And she heard that from many people. So I think that support is one card they still have in their pockets. And of course, we see that they have things to trade in, even the ceasefire that is not a ceasefire yet, but even if we came to a deal, which at the moment we are talking about a ceasefire that would only be attacks on energy infrastructure and maybe a ceasefire over the sea. Even that wouldn't have been possible if Ukraine didn't hold a card. And it did hold a card because it is able to attack with its own drones, but also with weapons provided by the West, to attack targets deeply into Russian territory. It has flown attacks on Moscow even with drones. It is destroying points of reorganization for the Russian army, also energy depots. So there is something that they can trade in, and which would be the ground for this ceasefire we are talking about now.
Yeah. Now, Europe seems determined to continue on exactly that line, supplying Ukraine with military aid no matter what the US does. Is it realistic to support Ukraine and also revamp and strengthen the own security of European Union countries? Is that even manageable?
I think it would be a very big stretch, and it's probably not manageable or not sustainable over a longer period of time. I'm not a military expert, but I think that the weapons provided to Ukraine would still be provided, but of course there are crucial systems the Europeans would, at the moment, have difficulties to replace. We have heard from Elon Musk that he's considering withdrawing Starlink, which was a threat from some European leaders say we would be able to replace it, but there's also some doubt cast on that. Then there's, of course, weapon systems like the Patriots, which are crucial to defending Ukrainian civilians who live in the big cities, who live in Kiev and other places, to keep them safe from Russian attacks, which continue. And these systems, too, would be hard to replace. So I think it would be a stretch, and of course it would slow down the buildup that Europeans have promised themselves to do in their own armies.
Germany certainly has gone out of its way, if you will, to support Ukraine, even by a constitutional reform that will allow for more military spending. What do you make of that decision by the, let's say, current German government and what it means for the future of the European defense?
I think it's a good signal that Germany has really understood the drama and the turning point that we are in right now, that our most important ally, the United States, has really switched sides and is now playing on the Russian side, at least for the moment being. So I think it's, first of all, a signal. And of course, it's good that the money is there. And the money is now flowing from all directions. It's flowing because Germany has loosened its debt brake. It's also because it's putting up an extra fund for military spending. And it's also coming from the European side, because Europe, too, will come up, or the Commission has already announced a large pot of money for the member states to spend on military defense. But of course, money is not everything. And we have talked about the capacities that Europe has to produce the weapons needed in Ukraine and also to produce the weapon systems needed for our own armies. So I think what the government is really has to do now, and that is the harder part, is spend it the right way, build up the industry in Germany, and also spend it quicker than we have been able to do before.
Now, I'm sure you also conduct interviews very often with many people who are involved and knowledgeable about this matter. We have been hearing for years, actually now, that Europe wasn't doing enough, that Germany wasn't doing enough in order to secure its future. Do you think that has changed, at least from the discourse, from what you hear?
I think it has changed, and if there's one good thing about Donald Trump, it's that he pushed Europeans in that direction already during his first term, insisting on further military spending. And of course now with the major-scale invasion of Russia and Ukraine, there is an even better and an existential reason to do it. So I think Europe has really come to the point where this is understood, and there is not so much a debate about this being the right thing to do right now. But I think we could have those discussions again very soon, because if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine and the ceasefire holds for a little while, I think that some voices in Germany will be back saying, well, look, we have come to some sort of peace with Putin. I wouldn't call it a peace then if it's a truce, but I think that's the way it might be interpreted. Let's go back to spending the money on something else. Let's go back to spend it on our infrastructure and social security and education. All these are legitimate goals, and all these are legitimate policy. But I think now...
And concerns of the population,
yes, of
course.
Of course. Yeah.
But do you think that is as good as it gets, a truce or a ceasefire, and that maybe we should say goodbye to this discourse of Ukraine winning, quote unquote, the war?
I think that's a realistic thing to say right now, because at least with this administration in place, I don't think Donald Trump will fundamentally shift positions. I think he has made it clear very much where he stands, and he might move on some points. He might get pressured by the Europeans to do or to make some concessions. He might be pressured by Europeans to demand some concessions from Putin. So it might not be as bad as it looks right now, but winning in the sense that Zelensky has defined it in the very beginning of the war, that is reinstating Ukraine's territorial integrity or its borders from 1991, even including Crimea, I think that's no longer a realistic option.
We have time for one more question with two options. Who is in the driver's seat, Putin or Trump?
Putin is in the driver's seat.
Clear words from Anna Sauer. Thank you so much for this very particular program. Thank you, of course, to you for watching. This was a very particular edition of To The Point, but we hope you still enjoyed it. We certainly did our best, and we hope to see you soon in our next shows, always on YouTube. Just search for DW News. I'm Khaled Gas. On behalf of the entire team, thank you and goodbye.